Hello and welcome to Scene 2 of Brand Film Live, where you can get exclusive insights on crafting branded content from experts in storytelling and marketing. I'm your host, Alexis Wierenga, producer for the Brand Film Workshop, brought to you by PR Week and Campaign US. Joining me today is Greg Beauchamp, the founder of Bindery, an independent film and content studio. How are you, Greg?
Good. Thanks for having me. Pumped to be here.
Thanks, Greg. Excited to have you here. Thanks for being here to talk about your work in brand film. Thank you also for being a juror for the 2020 Brand Film Awards.
Yeah, excited.
Yeah, we're excited. It's coming up on May 7th in New York. We also have Corey Bayers, Global VP of Marketing at Patagonia, who will be helming the judging with all the rest of the jurors, including Greg, for our 5th annual awards. And just for any listeners, just so you know, the deadline has been extended to Wednesday, January 29th. So it's not too late to submit your work for the chance to be honored as a leader in this new wave of marketing storytelling. You can submit your content at brandfilmlive.com. The link is in the description. You can even start right now, put your submission together as you listen to this podcast. And while you're at Brand Film Live, you can also register for the interactive workshop before the awards. Greg, as a juror, are there any words of advice you want to give to somebody who might be putting their submission together right now or wondering if they even should submit?
Yeah, I mean, put your best work forward, right? The stuff that you're really excited about, the things that you feel like really push boundaries. I think that's the work that we really want to review and potentially award. So what are the stuff that like you're really passionate about, the stories that you really care about? I think that's where the best work is done anyway, where there's that passion behind it. So that's the work I think you should put forward.
Great. Yeah, that's great to hear. Anything that you want to see more of in brand film in general, like genres or partnerships or...
Yeah, so like every brand needs they all kind of have their own voices and their own kind of different approach to how they want to create content. I mean, obviously, I think a lot of us as filmmakers are interested in creating narrative work for brand. Oftentimes that tends to be like the minority of the work that needs to get created, right? A lot of it's documentary content, which makes sense for brand. But anything that I think is serialized, both on the documentary or narrative side, where we're telling a bigger story that might be episodic, something a little bit bigger than maybe a 2-minute piece. I think that's the stuff where you can really like sink your teeth into and tell a bigger story.
All right. Well, thanks for the insight. Hopefully that helps anybody who might be putting together a submission to kind of get an idea of what's on our jurors' minds and what they'll be thinking about when they're reviewing submissions in the next month. All right, so today's focus is on the craft of brand film, the creative process, producing content that people want to watch. And so that's where Greg comes in. Greg, can you tell us a little bit about your backstory in, making films and how you first got started in branded content?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, my background really comes almost from an independent film side, and that's what I was really passionate in, and how I got into storytelling. And I saw a big opportunity for filmmakers to actually apply that craft to brands. And so when I started Bindery, now it's been almost 8 years ago, that was really at that inflection point where we had a lot of access to technology. We could get cameras that were much better quality at a lower price. And so I think, in terms of independent filmmakers, we had a bigger opportunity to be able to create really quality content. And, as we started to tell stories for brands, we realized that a lot of those briefs, those sort of longer form pieces where you tell a product story or you tell a founder story or you tell a customer story, that was really better suited almost for a filmmaker than it was for, say a traditional advertising agency or a traditional creative director. It was sort of thinking about, the story more as a filmmaker. And so that's kind of how we positioned Bindery. It's still, I think, our biggest weapon is really thinking about story from a filmmaker perspective and how do we apply that to brand? How do we help them kind of discover their voice, discover the stories that they should be telling, and really craft something that's longer form, and giving it the time to really like bring a story to life. So it's maybe not necessarily in a 30-second format. And we do a lot of 30-second commercials as well. But the vast majority of content that we make, as well as I think what's just being made in general out there, is not a 30-second commercial. It's a longer form piece of content. And again, I think that really suits the kind of the filmmaker toolkit and approach to creating content.
When you first started working on these branded pieces, how did how did that come together? Was it a learning curve for you to work with marketers on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like anything. I mean, a lot of the work that we started making was longer form documentary content for brands, right? Same process as making an original piece of work. It's a process of discovery. It's a process of finding the human insight, learning about the subject matter, a lot of research, a lot of writing prior to actually filming. All of that was really consistent with kind of the work that we were doing on the original side. So I think there's like a strong kind of overlap. It's that sort of like curiosity that I think filmmakers apply to the stories that they're telling, and then really diving into the subject matter, learning about it, what's the meat of the story, what's the insight, and then kind of crafting the world around that. And so I found that the kind of skill sets that we've developed as filmmakers were really applicable to, kind of teasing out the stories that brands needed to tell.
Any particular like projects stand out to you that you've done over the years in branded content that you're like, that was just like really proud of that one in a personal way or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, we've made so many pieces of branded content, both on the narrative side and on the documentary side. I mean, we made this really incredible series in partnership with Billboard and 1800 Tequila, where we profiled Christian Scott Atun Diageo and his sort of process of creating the new voice of jazz, and that was great. It was a series. It was a 4-episode series. Each episode was about 5 to 7 minutes. So it really gave us an opportunity to kind of sink our teeth into the story and tell something that was a little bit longer format. And something that didn't have to just be contained to like a 2-minute piece. And so that's one that really stands out. We also made a great film with The Hollywood Reporter, which was a completely original and narrative piece of content that was based on one of their readers' personal stories. And it was a short film, and that went on to not only be a great piece of content for Hollywood Reporter and Principal Financial, but also something that ran the festival circuit and really still has a life of its own.
Yeah, it's great to think about, or when that happens, that it lives beyond the initial buzz, or look what this marketer did, and people are like, I want to watch this just because it's a good piece of content after the festival has happened.
Yeah.
So why does it continue to be a focused area for Bindery branded content? Like, if you could just only do original content, or would you, or is it something you do because there's enjoyment in it?
Yeah, I mean, it was really the big insight for the whole business, right? So it's kind of our reason for being is being able to apply sort of our skills as filmmakers to brands. And we have a great mix of both, but oftentimes there's a story that we could make completely original on our own, right? Like Zion is a film that we produced that we took to Sundance, and it won 2 sports Emmys this year. That was a piece of content that we could have very easily made with a sports brand too, right? Like we could have made it with a Nike or a Dick's Sporting Goods. And so there was not really, in our mind, it's sort of, there's not even really a difference between the two, right? We would still approach the story in the same way. We would still research the story in the same way. And in terms of kind of scratching that itch of that like creative and curiosity of making a story that you're really passionate about, those two things are really similar for us in terms of making the original content and making, the branded content. So for us, it's hard to really decouple those two exercises. And I think, having the same teams working on our original stuff and working on our branded stuff really kind of elevates both sides. And so we don't really see them as kind of like two distinct areas of the business, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's not quite so separate as it may initially seem, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing more of that, with some documentaries ending up in like, big award circuits or festivals, like you were saying, that you don't even quite realize are branded content at first.
Yeah.
So like as in 5B or, Touch of Sugar.
Yeah, I mean, Gay Chorus, Big South won, is that what it was called? It won the Audience Award at Tribeca for documentary, and it was, produced by Airbnb and made by their internal team. And so I think, brands are really just trying to, to speak to their audiences and not just like an interruptive way, right? Not just about making ads or making a 15-second commercial or stopping you on Instagram. Like they want to create stories that really fills in the entire world for the brand. And, brands start to take on a life of their own, and fill in the full story beyond just, we sell a product, right? And I think it's really fun to see somebody like Airbnb getting into that game. Yeti's a great example of that. They're making, a bunch of really great content that kind of speaks to their ethos of a brand. Dick's Sporting Goods does a great job of that. Obviously, Red Bull has done, a tremendous amount of that work over 10 or 15 years. So I think, it's really exciting to see that kind of, content out there and brands that are standing behind storytelling in general and not necessarily like here is a product and putting that front and center. And it's a bold move. And I think it's a long tail strategy for these brands, right? It's like filling in the world, brand building, creating things that are lasting, and not just focused on, kind of the functional marketing, bottom funnel kind of marketing activities of like driving people to buy. And I think it's just part of that mix, right? It's part of like brand storytelling. Yes, you need the stuff that performs, but you really need the work that is brand building and audience building. And I think the best way to do that is through, branded content, longer form storytelling that allows people to really start to get a sense of, what the brand stands for, what the ethos of the brand is, and how that might play into their lives. Like what how that brand might, fit into their own kind of value system. And I think that's what us as audience members and us as consumers, like we want to be able to have that deep connection with how we're spending our dollars, right?
No, definitely. Well, so when you mentioned purposeful brands, one of them that comes to mind is Bombas with their socks and like the whole model they were built on. And I know you've done work with them as well, but in looking through some of the work, it is like some of the pieces, the product really is front and center, like the socks are like very obviously there, but then there's pieces that are a little bit longer, like the piece with Zac Efron. It is like a mini story in itself. Like, do you see those as being more commercial work, or do you see those if you got a submission like that for brand film? Do you think it would fit there? How do you see that work? Yeah,
I mean, I think the big distinction is branded content doesn't exist to stop you in your tracks and give you, a product message, right? I mean, that's sort of like what a commercial is intended to do. And that's kind of how we think about the difference between commercials and branded content. Obviously, if you're seeking this content out, if you're being served it more in kind of a longer format way, it's something that you have an opportunity to really watch something that's going to be a minute and a half, 2 minutes or longer. I think for Bombas, it's, they have to storytell across all formats. They have to create content that are commercials. They have to create content that's longer form storytelling. They have it's such a rich brand, and they have such an incredible sort of backstory to how they got founded, right? The founders saw that socks were the #1 most requested item at homeless shelters, and they actually built an entire company around selling socks so that they could give socks to people who needed it. And that, that's an incredible story, and that story needs to be told, right? So, I mean, there's so many different facets of their brand, and they have a lot of product lines also that all need their individual stories as well. So, that's where you start to create. I mean, I think last year we did 12 campaigns for them. Some of them were more focused on, commercials. Like we did this really fun one with Dan Marino launching merino socks for them. And that was more of, we did a mix of kind of branded content that was longer form. We also did some fun sort of like short form little jokes with him. And then we did some traditional sort of 30-second TV commercials that ran on ESPN and all of that. But it's really about creating this mix. I mean, obviously all brands need that marketing mix of commercial and content. And so for Bombas specifically, I mean, they have so much storytelling potential. There was this great line that they just released with Yara Shahidi, which was called the Unite Collection. And so that really opened itself up to a lot of brand storytelling. So we launched the collection with Yara, and then we profiled 3 activists and what they're doing in their community to sort of unite and get people excited about giving back to their community. So that was like, it's really like rich documentary storytelling, about these people and what they're doing to impact their communities. Very different than sort of like a 30-second commercial, right? So like that lent itself a little bit better to this bigger kind of branded storytelling. So for Bombas, I mean, that's, it's really just across the gamut. I think that's what we found. We started working with them. We helped on their Indiegogo video 7 years ago.
Oh,
so
wow.
we spent
Right
a lot.
at the start.
It's been a long time of sort of like learning their brand and, discovering the stories that they have to tell. And then just really working, with their internal team to kind of bring those stories out, and planning the year out to where we can say, okay, here's where we can really sink our teeth into like a bigger story or a bigger launch. Here's where we want to serve, audiences with more of a commercial to drive performance, and really kind of planning out sort of like their story journey for the whole year.
So, with thinking about, just the wide view of it, year-long, multiple platforms, does that affect, the production standpoint? Are you, creating certain things to be like, this is for the Instagram audience and it's going to be these dimensions for like IGTV type of thinking? Are you thinking about telling stories in different ways for each platform to each audience, or is it still part of a holistic, just like under one umbrella?
Yeah, I mean, that's the game right now, right? Is to figure out how do you create sort of unique content for each platform. When you study filmmaking in general, you learn about the 3-act structure, you learn about the hero's journey, you learn about the what you need to see on page 10 versus what you need to see on page 15 or what you need to see at the midpoint. And what we don't refer that to as formula. We call that form, right? And so oftentimes the constraints of how an audience needs to be, how to tell a story to an audience. That oftentimes the constraints of that is really freeing, because you start to understand like, here's how I need to craft the story to really deliver home the message, right? And that's like such a great primer for how to create for brands. I mean, that's like, we learn these rules all the time, and they're sort of like, ever changing too. So we're really engaged with the Instagrams and the Facebooks and the YouTubes of the world to understand what's working on those platforms. When are we losing audiences? Just in general, right? Like, we know at second 4 on YouTube, like, we really need to create something that doesn't lose their attention.
Exactly.
And so it's very similar to writing a script, right? You're thinking about like, okay, at second 4, I need to do this. At second 7, I need to do this. At second 13, this has to happen. And so it's very similar. I think that's, our brains as thinking about, script writing and creating, a 90-minute movie. It's very similar to writing, a 15-second spot, because you have to hit these points and really take the audience on this journey within this one format, right? And so, I think back to your question is, yes, you're always thinking about like, what is the medium and how are you engaging the consumer and telling a story in that medium, right? Obviously, you're trying to like, get as much out of production dollars as you can. So everything has to be done on the same day of production, right? So it's like, how do you, center frame so that you can crop an anamorphic image for a 9:16 Instagram story? There's a lot of those types of challenges. And I think what we're learning is a lot of what works on digital also works on television. So there tends to be kind of, the tail wagging the dog, as it were, right? So how do you create a story for digital, and then how does it start to transform for TV? How do you create something where somebody's watching it on their phone and they probably don't have sound on? What the story needs to work in that construct as well. I think the mediums are presenting a lot of challenges in terms of like the story structure and how it works. And I think just taking a filmmaker approach to how do you craft within that medium is the thing that's really fun for us to do, and think about how to even mess with the medium too. So if you have a 6-second spot, how do you make it about the fact that you only have a 6-second spot, right? Or if you're making a spot that's about skippable, how do you make it about, the spot becomes about skipping it, right? And so that, we're always thinking about how, like, where the audiences are, where they might be watching this, and what's the best piece of content that really connects to them and makes the idea really sticky in their brain.
Yeah. I start to notice it now, like when I'm watching YouTube and I find myself like, I find myself noticing what the strategy is on those skippable things, like, because sometimes they're just blatant, like, please don't skip. But sometimes I find them saying something like really like almost like clickbaity, and I'm like, I don't want to give it to them because I know they're just trying to get me to like keep watching. But then other times I'm like, no, I'm sold. I want to watch this full thing now because I liked what you did in the first 5 seconds.
That's right. I mean, that's a goal, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess, you talked about this a bit, but when you are working with a brand, what are kind of those initial steps? Are you all in the room together, like putting together an outline? Do you get ideas from them and then, go with your team and then come back to them? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, for us, and I think it's similar for a lot of companies like ours, is it really comes down to a brief, right? And some, when we work with agencies and some brands that have really robust internal capabilities, like they might come to us with a brief or they might come to us with an idea. If they don't, it's really about sort of coalescing around that brief and understanding, who are we talking to, where they are. So like, where is this media buy? Where are we going to be serving this up? And then what are we trying to tell them, right? And so once we identify kind of what those things are, we can start to create scripts and, creative around that. So that's really where it starts, is like really aligning on a brief, understanding what we're doing. And that gives us kind of the framework that we need in order to storytell.
Mm-hmm. Are there any lessons you've had to learn, from marketers along, like, I heard the phrase once, talking about brand film with somebody, that it was like an idea of learning to speak each other's language. Have there been things you had to like learn what marketers are thinking about, or the skills they have? Are there things you've learned from them, or you feel like you've had to teach them about filmmaking that maybe they didn't understand?
Yeah, I mean, that's the constant. Storytelling is sort of universal, right? Beginning, middle, end, create a hero, give him obstacles, like all of those sorts of things are universal. And, that has been learned and can be learned. Everything about marketing is changing, right? And that's something that we're constantly learning, and it's different for every brand that we work with. So we lean very heavily on the brand marketers of the companies that we work with to really guide us along that process, right? So they understand their customers better than we do. They have the data about what's working, and what we really is. So we sort of spend a lot of time listening and understanding what's working, what might not be working. Sometimes you have to test and you start to see and then you tweak too. But just they're the experts in their brand. They understand their audience. And so just like any film that we might be making on the documentary side, where we're doing a lot of research and discovery, that's what we do with brand marketers, is tell us about your brand. We're like sponges, like give us the information that we need to know about your audience. Tell us the stories that you're trying to tell us where you're trying to reach them. And then we can kind of come back with creative ways to craft stories in order to engage those audiences.
Are there any, common misunderstandings sometime, like that, marketers think like, oh, can you just make this way? And you have to tell them like filmmaking's not quite like that, or
Sure.
I guess in the beginning, maybe it seems like it has a pretty smooth process now. After years of doing it, you understand how to work with people well. Just curious, if somebody is getting started in this area, any young filmmaker starting to work on branded content, and they're like, how do I work with a marketer? How do I work with a brand?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's try to listen more than you're speaking, right? So like understand really what they're looking for, the audiences who they want to reach, the places in which they need to reach them, and the sort of like key attributes of what they're trying to tell. Really, soak that up and then try to storytell with those aspects, right? I think oftentimes we're like quick to jump to like, okay, I know what this person I know the story for this brand, or I know like what we should say about this product. And I think just like kind of taking a step back and letting, the sort of brand marketers really express what they need to express about the brand, and sort of like helping them understand how that might fit into the context of a larger story. That's really like the role that I believe we play in that relationship. So I would say definitely like sit back and get the information that you need before you kind of suggest, what the story might be.
Thinking about music videos, and notable film directors starting there. and telling stories in short form or enhancing through music. Do you see brand film as a stage in that journey as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's just another place to, to explore the craft, right? I think, and each medium, it has its own constraints. And I think that's really fun for a filmmaker. But yeah, I mean, it's open. Like, I think, prior to about 10 or 15 years ago, you really did. It was sort of like you had music videos and then you had commercials, right? And now the world has really opened up in terms of making full up narrative content for brands, making, digital series for brands. It's just a whole sort of like new world of, being able to apply those filmmaking skills to lots of different pieces of content besides a music video. So I think it's just made the pie so much larger in terms of what you could create. And I mean, you even see, people are creating music videos for brands too. So it's all it's this kind of like intersection of entertainment and advertising, which is where we love to sit, right? That's like, how do you make a music video for a brand? How do you make a documentary series for a brand? And so I think there's just so much more opportunity for people to kind of explore that curiosity of storytelling and get brand partners who are really interested in doing that with them.
I've also heard, marketers talk about the idea that, especially thinking about music, that the permissions and, licensed for like using something in typical marketing, it's like limited and it runs for like a year and then you can't use it anymore or something like that. But, the whole idea is if you're investing so much in brand film and having that continue to live, do you think about that and advising brands like you're going to want to invest in like owning this or different permits for whether it's a celebrity appearance or the music in it or anything else? Does that come up?
Yeah, I mean, rights are always an issue, right? And they tend to, that's a conversation that you're having right at the outset in the bidding of the project of like, what is the run of this? What is the media that's being bought for this piece of content? And that really dictates the music rights that you're getting, the talent rights that you're getting. And there's also budget implications, to that as well. So oftentimes if there's a set budget, you're sort of saying, well, this is the type of talent that we can get and we can, get 2 years North American rights, right? Or like, if there's a bigger budget, you can get more. Is it celebrity talent? Are they real people? Are they, non-union talent? Like you're sort of looking at the pieces of the puzzle and trying to figure out like, where you are in terms of like the tools that you can, or the pieces that you can put in place in order to tell the best story and making sure that you keep it all within the constraints of timing and budget. But it's certainly something that we're talking with our brand partners about all the time is how do you get the most out of this content without being kind of like hamstrung by the rights of music and talent and other rights managed, aspects of a project.
Do you think, when you come into that perspective, then do you think it should be a priority of makers to think you want to make something that is going to be like a movie that it could live on a streaming service and people could be discovering it 5 years from now? Or is that not so much, a priority when you think about doing like a documentary or a long narrative piece with a brand?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really strong kind of like distinction in terms of like a brand. If a brand is present in the content, not just sort of like in the case of Airbnb, making that documentary, that was different. It wasn't about Airbnb, right? So anytime you're making a piece of content about the brand and the brand is a central piece of it, like that's never going to live on like a Netflix or a Hulu, right? And so I think that's kind of the distinction is it something might be paid for by a brand, but if it's a story that is sort of disassociated with, sort of the product itself, maybe again, it still sort of speaks to the ethos of the brand. That's something that can have a much bigger life, right? Something that can exist, outside of sort of, the traditional kind of like put it on YouTube, put it on Vimeo, and just kind of let it live. But if you're looking to like distribute content across Netflix and, Hulu, and Amazon, like that's something that, really can't be branded in the way that it's an advertisement for a product. I think it sort of compromises that, the expectation of an audience member where it's like, is this an ad or is this, a piece of original content?
All right, well, our time is about to wrap up, so I'll just finish it with one final question. Any final words of advice from the creative perspective for someone working on a brand film out there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the big thing, anybody who's like really trying to get into this game too, it's like you got to find your people. I think that's like the thing that, you know, really makes everything, like it makes the good days so much better. It makes the bad days really tolerable. So it's like find your collaborators, find the people who you respect their taste, their ideas, their abilities, and you just hold on to those people for as long as you can. And I think that, you know, that and then coupled with like really just trying to play the long game, you know, like invest in the work that you're making, invest in the client relationships, invest in your collaborators. Like that's really what's going to, you know, to create a career that spans a really long period of time. I think a lot of us early in our career, we get really precious about the work that we're making. So I think it's just thinking about it in the context of having a rich career, of creating a lot of pieces of content. You know, what sets you up for success? And I think it's finding the people and then investing in the work and the relationships.
Yeah, got to have the right team. You need a lot of different, people to come together to make something that's like high quality and on set even, or just even collaborating to create it.
Yep, that's right. Team sport.
Yeah, it's a team sport. All right, so to wrap it all up, I want to remind everyone, head to brandfilmlive.com where you can buy your tickets for the film awards, the workshop, get your submissions in right before the deadline. And thank you to Greg for talking with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to watch your submissions.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, thank you for tuning in to Brand Film Live.